I only married you because you're the boss's daughter. My husband, Oliver, said with a smile. I was lying sick in bed, watching the scarves and gloves I had lovingly knitted for him thrown aside like they were worthless. He didn't even try to hide how disappointed he was in me. Seeing this, I felt the need to show him how wrong he was if he thought everything was going his way. Just imagining his reaction made me laugh. My name is Stacy Morgan, and I've been married to Oliver for 5 years. We don't have kids, but we've been living happily together. Oliver works a lot and is often away from home, so sometimes I feel lonely, but he always makes time for us on his days off, which helps me feel better. I met Oliver through my dad, who was his boss. Oliver suggested I stay at home instead of working, which worked well for me. I had time to myself, so I got to know the neighbors, started sewing, and even worked out. I tried different things to keep myself busy, but sewing and knitting became my favorite. Every winter, I made scarves and gloves for Oliver. At first, they weren't great, but I improved over time. Eventually, Oliver said they were as good as store-bought ones. Hearing that made me love sewing even more. I told him, when we have a child, I want to sew with them. He smiled and said, maybe I'll join in and learn when the time comes. I always supported Oliver, doing housework and spending time with him on his days off. Because of his high salary, my life probably looked perfect to others. I didn't have any complaints and thought I'd live quietly with my kind husband and our future child. But things changed about 2 years ago. One day, while waiting for Oliver to come home, I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed. Oliver took me to the hospital. When I woke up, I heard the doctor telling Oliver that my condition wasn't mild and that I'd have to deal with it for the rest of my life. It wasn't life-threatening, but it could happen again. The doctor suggested I stay in the hospital until I got better. Seeing how worried I was, Oliver said, you'll be in the hospital for a while, but it's okay. I'll visit you whenever I can, and we'll get through this together. His words and the way he held my hand made me feel less anxious. With him by my side, I believed everything would be fine, even though I had no real reason to think so. After that, Oliver visited me almost every day, just like he promised. He'd hold my hand and ask how I was doing. If I said I was bored, he'd bring my sewing tools, and we'd sew together while chatting about our day. Teaching him how to sew was fun, and it helped me forget how boring the hospital was. But these happy times didn't last. After I gave him the scarf I knitted that year, he started visiting less and less. Soon, he only showed up once every few weeks. At first, I thought he was just busy with work, so I kept sewing, planning to give him gloves when he visited next. The doctor said I'd be discharged by the end of the year, so I wanted to give him the gloves then. I poured all my feelings into making them, hoping they'd make up for the time we'd been apart. When Oliver finally visited after a long time, he looked at the gloves I gave him and said coldly, "Are you still making these? They're just a nuisance now." Then he handed me the scarf I'd made for him last year, still untouched, and divorce papers. The scarf looked exactly like it did when I gave it to him. He hadn't even worn it. "It's been 2 years since you've been in the hospital. I heard you'll be discharged soon, but I can't keep taking care of you," he said. "We should get a divorce." I looked at the divorce papers. Oliver had already signed them. I thought to myself, so, this is how it ends. Honestly, I had thought about this possibility ever since he stopped visiting. I tried to convince myself he was just busy, but deep down, I knew the Oliver I married would never neglect me, no matter how busy he was. If work had gotten harder, he would have told me. When he stopped showing up without explanation, I knew something was wrong. That's why I managed to ask him why he wanted a divorce without breaking down. I wasn't trying to hold on to him. In fact, I knew I'd probably become a burden to him. If the kind Oliver I knew wanted a divorce, I had no choice, but I was curious, why had he changed his mind? "I'll explain everything next week," I said, then hung up the phone. I smiled at my worried parents and told my dad, "I need to ask you for a favor." I shared my plan with him and asked him to get ready for what was coming. "I understand. I've already prepared the necessary documents. The meeting is next week, so we don't have much time, but we'll figure it out," my dad said, giving me a slightly worried smile. As a father, he probably felt guilty for introducing me to my husband in the first place. His anger toward my husband seemed to push him to do whatever he could to help. I thanked him and waited for the day of the meeting. Just imagining my husband's face during the discussion made me smile for the first time in a long while. With my dad's help, I got everything ready. We decided to hold the meeting at my family's home. My parents and I sat together, while my husband sat alone across from us. He knew my parents were hurt by the divorce, but he didn't seem to care anymore. He probably thought he didn't need to be polite to them. He looked calm, even smiling a little, and acted like he didn't have a care in the world. I'm the one who's been wronged here, but I'm not asking for much. The money from selling the house is enough for me, he said, acting like he was being generous. Seeing his attitude, my dad's face turned red with anger, but I gently placed my hand on his to calm him down. I knew that in this meeting, my husband was the one who would lose, not us. There was no reason for us to get upset. There's something important we need to talk about first, I said. As I spoke, my dad handed over a document. It showed that the land where my husband had sold the house actually belonged to my dad. The house was in your name, that's true, but the land it's built on is my father's property, and he still owns it. This document proves it, I explained. When my husband heard this, he frowned slightly. So what? The house was mine, and I sold it. No one can complain about that. Do you really think this changes anything? He said, laughing like the whole thing was a joke. It's true that legally, he could sell the house since it was in his name, but I continued, you must have checked the legal details before selling the house, and there's no problem with that, but this isn't just about the law. The family who bought the house will have a big problem if they find out the land isn't yours. My dad can ask them to pay rent for the land. Don't you think that will cause trouble for them? I asked. The situation wasn't what the buyers were told. My dad and I didn't plan to make them pay rent or force them to leave, but we also weren't going to give up the land for free. We decided to offer to sell the land to the family. If they didn't buy it, they'd have to deal with the fact that the land wasn't theirs. The land was a gift from my dad for us to live on, not for strangers to take over. If they found out, they might even sue my husband because he didn't tell them the truth. Imagine how upset they'd be. They bought their dream house, only to find out they'd have to pay more for the land. After getting proof of my dad's ownership, we went to talk to the family who bought the house. When we explained the situation, they understood. They said if there were any problems, it was my husband's fault, not theirs. If the meeting didn't go well, they'd sue him. Seeing my husband's face turn pale, I knew he finally understood how serious this was. He realized he'd have to pay a lot of money because of his mistake. In a shaky voice, he asked, "What should I do then?" I smiled and said, "The family can buy the land from us, and you'll have to cover the cost. That way, everything will be settled smoothly. If they own both the house and the land, there won't be any problems. Of course, they didn't know about the land when they bought the house, so they'll probably make you pay for it, and since the land is in a good location, it could cost more than the house itself. Even if you sell everything you own, it might not be enough, or, you could buy back the house and pay for the land, but you'd also have to pay the family to move out. Even if you sell the house and land again, you probably won't have any money left. No matter what he chose, my husband would lose." I also added, "I've been hurt by your actions, and I plan to ask for compensation for that. Keep that in mind." All this time, my husband had used me to get ahead at work. Now that I knew the truth, I felt disgusted by everything he'd done. I planned to sue him for the emotional pain he caused me, even though I might not win. Just bringing it up was enough to make him worry. With everything going on, he didn't have the time or money to deal with more problems. To make things worse for him, my dad said, "Even though I'm retired, I still have friends at the company. I've been talking to them lately, and they've told me what you really thought of my daughter and what you did. Everyone looks down on you now, Oliver." My dad smiled as he said this, and Oliver finally realized how bad things were for him. The reputation he'd built at work using me and the money he got from selling the house, none of it was his anymore. Now, let's talk about what happens next. Now that you understand your situation, we need to decide about the property, compensation, and the house, I said, smiling confidently. My smile was different from the ones I'd given Oliver before. I was happier than I'd been since we separated. "I hope you understand that what happens to your money and property will be decided here today," I added. Hearing this, Oliver could only laugh nervously, with tears in his eyes. In the end, the meeting went in my favor. Oliver agreed to pay me alimony and cover the cost of the land. We explained everything to the family who bought the house, and they were fine with the solution. Everyone except Oliver came out ahead, and he lost everything. The rumors my dad started spread through the company, and Oliver's reputation was ruined. His chance at a promotion was gone, and soon, my dad told me Oliver had quit his job. I'd say it was karma. Things gained by taking advantage of others can disappear just as easily. What Oliver thought he had achieved was just an illusion. As for me, I'm now living with my parents and teaching sewing classes. My classes aren't packed, but I earn enough from my neighbors and their kids. Even though I couldn't sew with my own children like I once told Oliver, I've found happiness in sharing what I love with others.